I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range of organisations.
In just one morning at Buckingham Palace, the balance of power within the British monarchy shifted. King Charles entered a private room without any formal ceremony. In his hand was a sealed red briefcase, an object typically present when the monarch's most important decisions were about to be made. Inside the room were Prince William, Princess Anne, Queen Camilla, and a small group of high-ranking officials. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the presence of the red ring was enough to create a heavy atmosphere. Charles was straightforward. He announced that Prince William would continue to manage the day-to-day operations of the monarchy. From royal schedules and task analysis to strategic meetings, personnel recommendations, media guidance, and sensitive family decisions, all would now pass through William. Charles remained king. He retained the crown and supreme legal authority. But since that morning, he was no longer the one wielding the power of the crown. William didn't smile. Camilla immediately tensed. Princess Anne remained completely silent. The silence made it clear to everyone in the room that the decision wasn't yet final. But why would Charles make the biggest decision of his reign without informing his own son and sister? And what truly compelled the king to relinquish power sooner than anyone had anticipated? Before we begin, if you're new to the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss out on surprising behind-the-scenes royal stories, subtle power movements, and shocking developments you won't find anywhere else. Okay, let's begin. Charles didn't stop at a mere declaration. He placed before William one by one the red briefcase, a ceremonial key, a set of operational documents, and the most important summaries of royal affairs. Each item placed down carried its own significance. The red box symbolized the king's most sensitive decisions. The ceremonial key represented access, and the documents before William were the entire apparatus he would now control. William pulled his chair closer, looked directly at his father, and asked in a low voice, "How long will this arrangement last?" The room fell silent. Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the red box, as if he too were weighing the weight of what he had just given away. After a few seconds, the king said, "No end date is planned." That answer made William understand that this wasn't a trial period, nor a temporary replacement. He was no longer prepared to assume power in the future. Power had arrived that very morning. Camilla was next to speak. She asked if William's new authority included the activities, personnel proposals, and public plans of other members of the royal family. Charles confirmed emphatically, "From now on, all operational proposals must go through Prince William." Camilla's face immediately tensed. Requests that she had previously discussed directly with her husband now required William's consideration, approval, or even rejection. Anne looked from Charles to William. The anxiety in her eyes gradually turned into determination. And just as William reached for the briefcase, Anne unexpectedly stopped him. A calm but firm voice rang out. "Wait, Princess Anne!" She took a step forward, looked directly at William, then turned to the advisors in the room. "Please everyone leave." No one objected. In just a few seconds, the meeting room door closed. Inside, only the two siblings remained, King Charles and Princess Anne. No more royal formalities, no more diplomatic words. Only a sister facing her brother with whom she had been by her side for decades. Anne looked at Charles for a long time, before asking each word heavy with emotion. "Are you protecting the monarchy, or are you silently abandoning the burden you've waited your whole life to bear?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He stood silently before the table, where the briefcase still sat, as if he himself were facing a question he had never wanted to answer. Anne continued. She insisted she had never opposed William taking over. What she found unacceptable was the way Charles chose to implement that decision. He kept the plan secret until the last minute. William had no time to prepare psychologically. The family also had no chance to adapt to such a drastic change. If the transfer took place in absolute secrecy, the palace could easily form new factions, and William could be caught between the responsibility of a leader and the feeling of betraying his own father. Charles sighed softly. He explained that if the plan had been discussed earlier, each member of the family would have sought to protect their influence. The debates would have dragged on, the pressures would have increased, and the decision might never have been made. Anne still kept her eyes fixed on her brother. Finally, she asked the question Charles seemed to have prepared the answer to, but never wanted to hear it aloud. Did you give William power because he was truly ready, or because you yourself were exhausted? The room fell silent again. After a few seconds, Charles slowly replied, "Both." It was the first time he had admitted something he had been trying to hide for so long. He still trusted William, but he also knew he no longer had the strength to continue shouldering the daily battles of the monarchy as before. However, that decision hadn't been made on that fateful morning at Buckingham Palace. It had actually begun months earlier on a chaotic night at Windsor Castle. It was the Commonwealth reception, one of the most solemn royal events. With only minutes left before the procession entered the main hall, the entire plan suddenly descended into chaos. Two completely contradictory directives were issued almost simultaneously. Queen Camilla's office requested a change in the order of the procession according to a new plan. Meanwhile, King Charles's senior advisors insisted that the original plan had been approved by the king and should not be changed. Those in charge of the ceremony began to panic. The assistants exchanged glances, none daring to make a final decision. Only a few minutes remained before the doors opened. A small mistake at this point could turn the ceremony into an incident in front of hundreds of guests and the media. A senior assistant quickly approached Charles. He asked the king very briefly, "Your Majesty, which plan should we follow?" Charles glanced at Camilla. Then he turned to his private secretary. The atmosphere in the room became heavy. A few seconds passed, but there was still no answer. Just then, Prince William stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Neither did he question anyone. William calmly observed the entire list of the procession, quickly rearranging the order, reassigning positions to each member, and giving final instructions to the organizing team. Everyone immediately began to carry out their duties. Just a few moments later, the large doors opened. The royal procession entered on time. The reception went smoothly without a single mishap. For the guests present that day, it was a perfect event. But for Charles, it was a moment of contradiction. What pained him wasn't the near miss with the ceremony. But when everything was over, the officials didn't turn to the king for final confirmation. They all looked to William. Right in the room where the king was present, the person the royal apparatus had chosen to await the final decision was none other than the heir. Charles understood that he hadn't yet announced the transfer of power. But naturally, the entire system had begun to turn toward William. It was no longer a possibility in the future. It was a reality unfolding right before his eyes. The reception ended to applause from the guests. To the public, it was a perfect event. But inside Windsor Castle, an even more significant confrontation had just begun. After the officials had left, Princess Anne invited Charles into a private drawing room. She closed the door, then turned to look at her brother. There was no more music, no more cameras. Only the two siblings faced each other in a heavy atmosphere. Anne broke the silence first. She said that what worried her wasn't William's handling of the crisis. What worried her more was that Charles's hesitation was beginning to damage the very institution he had dedicated his life to protecting. Charles shook his head. He admitted he knew William was capable, but if too much power was given to the heir, the public might perceive the king as no longer capable of leading. He feared that relinquishing power would be seen as a sign of weakness. Anne took another step forward. Her voice was calm, but each word was clear. Refusing help doesn't make you stronger. It only weakens the institution. That statement silenced Charles. Just then, the door creaked open. Prince William entered. He looked at them both and spoke softly. "If you have crossed the line today, I will withdraw." The room immediately fell silent. Charles gazed at his son for a long time without saying a word. More than anyone else, he understood that removing William from the administration might restore the old order. But at the same time, he would also be removing the very person who had just averted a crisis that could have humiliated the royal family before the world. That night, as the corridors of Windsor Castle fell silent, Anne overheard Charles conversing with a senior advisor. The king's voice was low but firm. He requested that plans be made to transfer the day-to-day operations to Prince William. At that moment, Anne understood that things had changed. The reception at Windsor was not just an incident that had been successfully resolved. It had become an irreversible turning point, the beginning of the most significant decision of Charles's entire reign. And now, with the conference room door closed, Prince William finally had a few quiet minutes. He stepped to a corner of the hallway, took out his phone, and called the first person that came to mind. It was Catherine. The call connected quickly. William said only a short sentence, but it was enough for Catherine to understand everything. It happened sooner than we thought. No further explanation was needed. Catherine understood. She knew the transition they had both thought was still ahead had become a reality in a single morning. Catherine's voice was as calm as ever. She gently advised her husband to return home if he could, to give himself some time, to take a deep breath, to think carefully before signing any important directives. From that moment on, every decision William made would no longer only affect the daily affairs of the royal family. It would impact his family, his closest associates, and the public image of the monarchy. William glanced down at the red briefcase beside him. It had only been given to him a few minutes ago, but its weight seemed to far exceed anything he had ever imagined. He was silent for a few seconds before replying to Catherine in a deeper voice. "I can't go home yet." Outside the door, his assistants were already waiting. Advisors were preparing their first reports. Meetings needed approval. Decisions needed to be made. The entire palace was focused on the man who had just taken over. William only wished for an hour of quiet time with his family before beginning his new responsibilities. But power came before he had a chance to mentally prepare himself to receive it. And that was perhaps the greatest challenge the future king would face. While William still stood silently beside the red briefcase, an urgent message arrived. Queen Camilla wanted to see him privately, not the next day, not after the meetings were over, but right now. William took a deep breath and entered the small room where Camilla was waiting. The atmosphere was completely different from the previous meeting. There were no advisors, no secretaries, just the two of them facing each other in a newly restructured power structure. Camilla spoke first. Her voice was calm but betrayed her tension. "Now, do all the initiatives I've discussed directly with the king now have to go through you?" It wasn't just a question of procedure. It was a question about her position in the new system. William didn't answer immediately. He paused for a few seconds to think, then spoke in a calm voice. "Cooperation is not punishment. Reviewing it doesn't mean disrespect." He explained that Camilla's public role would not change. Her duties would continue. He had no intention of using the power he had just been given to resolve any personal disagreements within the family. His sole objective was to ensure the royal apparatus operated in unity and stability. Camilla listened in silence. William continued. He said that the new system was not designed to weaken anyone. But once the king had decided to transfer power, all processes had to change accordingly. This meant that all important proposals, regardless of which member of the royal family came from, would have to go through the same approval process. There would be no exceptions. There were no more separate paths. Camilla nodded slightly. She understood that she hadn't been excluded from the royal family. Her role remained, but the path that once led directly to Charles's approval was no longer hers. Remarkably, throughout the meeting, William never once displayed a confrontational attitude. He didn't criticize. He didn't reproach. Neither did he bring up any past conflicts. Instead, he chose a different leadership style. Calm but firm, controlling but not imposing, no retaliation, and above all, not allowing personal emotions to sway decisions he believed were necessary for the stability of the entire institution. The meeting between William and Camilla ended calmly. But outside that room, a much larger problem was quietly forming. It didn't originate from the members of the royal family. It came from the very people operating the machinery behind the palace doors. Just hours after Charles's announcement, high-ranking officials had inadvertently split into two groups. One group immediately forwarded all important report schedules and proposals to William's office. They believed that authority had been established and all decisions needed to follow the new order. The other group continued to seek out Charles, not out of defiance, but because they hoped the king would change his mind, or at least subtly adjust the directives William was about to issue. Two centers of power began to coexist within the same palace. This meant the risk of conflicting orders. Decisions were delayed. Information was leaked. Factions were forming. And most dangerously, the father-son relationship could be exploited to serve the interests of others. The first briefing quickly reflected this chaos. A high-ranking official stood up and proposed suspending all important decisions until Charles had given his opinion. At that moment, the meeting room door suddenly opened. Princess Anne entered. No one invited her, but no one stopped her either. Anne looked around the room and slowly spoke. "The king has decided who will govern." Pretending nothing has changed will only weaken both Charles and William. No one responded. The atmosphere in the room immediately fell silent. All eyes turned towards William. Right before him lay the first document that needed to be signed in his capacity as the head of the royal administration. William picked up his pen. He didn't rush to sign. He understood that this wasn't simply an administrative document. A signature could unite the entire palace, but it could also initiate a power struggle that no one wanted. William looked down at the file before him. For a few seconds, the room was completely silent. Anne broke the silence. She spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Caution is valuable, but hesitation will be seen as a weakness." William nodded slightly. Then he signed. It was the first signature of the man who had just taken over the reins of power. The first directive, issued immediately afterward, stipulated all high-level reports must be sent simultaneously to William and Charles. No advisor was allowed to isolate the king. No one was allowed to seek two different answers from two different offices. Every strategic decision had to go through a unified chain of command, and absolutely no official was allowed to exploit the transition process to sow discord between father and son. It was a tough decision, but it was also a very clear message. William was not seeking to replace Charles. He was protecting the king from the risk of becoming the center of power struggles. The effects were almost immediate. A senior courtier submitted his resignation. Camilla canceled a scheduled meeting. A personnel proposal from her office was put on hold under the new procedure. The briefings all shifted direction. In just a few short hours, everyone in the palace realized one thing. The crown remained on Charles's head, but the central authority of the entire royal apparatus had shifted to William. By the end of the day, the change was no longer just in statements or documents. It began to appear in the smallest details of royal life. The private secretary entered Charles's office, carrying the official schedule for the following day. The assistant placed the document on the desk and explained that some tasks had been adjusted, and all changes had been approved by William. Charles said nothing. He picked up the page and read it once. Then he read it a second time. There was no insulting word. No task had been abruptly removed. No one had deliberately made him feel sidelined. William and Catherine had simply been assigned additional state duties, while Charles continued to appear at carefully selected events to maintain the stable and consistent image of the monarchy. Everything made sense. Everything was meticulously arranged. But that's what hurt Charles even more. For the first time, he saw a complete royal system operating without waiting for his decision. The schedule had been changed. Tasks had been assigned. The assistants knew what to do, and it all happened before he could even speak. Charles slowly set the paper down. The chair, the desk, and the room still belonged to him. The crown was still his, but the rhythm of the entire institution had begun to follow someone else. A while later, Anne found her brother sitting alone in the room. On the table was a tray of food still untouched. She didn't ask Charles why he wasn't eating. She simply sat down opposite him. After a moment of silence, Charles softly said, "I thought I would feel relieved." He paused. "But I just feel like I've lost a part of myself." Anne didn't deny the pain. She understood that for Charles, duty wasn't just work. It was the identity he'd carried almost his entire life. Charles opened a device beside him and began composing a message. It was an instruction to reconsider a decision William had just approved. Simply sending it would instantly restore his old power. Charles stared at the screen for a long time. His finger paused on the send button. Then finally, he deleted the entire message. No one saw that moment except Anne, but it was one of the most important decisions of the day. For the first time, Charles actively chose not to interfere. For the first time, he truly allowed his son to lead. As night fell, the palace corridors gradually became quiet. But for William, his first day in power was far from over. Anne found him alone in the library. No assistants, no advisors, no documents awaiting his signature. Only William sat under the dim light, the ceremonial key Charles had given him that morning in his hand. He gazed at it for a long time, as if that small object weighed more than the crown itself. Anne approached but didn't speak immediately. William knew she was there. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "I'm not afraid of making a wrong decision." His voice was low and weary. "I'm afraid that every right decision will push my father deeper into darkness." Anne looked at her grandson. In that moment, William no longer resembled a newly appointed heir to the throne. He resembled a son fearing that his responsibilities would cause his father pain. William explained that from now on, every request from Charles would appear before him as a document to be reviewed. Every proposal from Camilla required his approval or rejection. If he approved, he might inadvertently strengthen the influence of a relative. If he rejected, he might hurt his own family. Every administrative decision carried a personal price. William tightened his grip on the key. He said that in just one day, Charles seemed to have aged. The king's gaze had changed. His silence regarding the new schedule was also different. William worried that each of his strong decisions would make his father feel smaller, until one day duty will silently destroy what remains between them. William's voice slowed. "I can bear the responsibility, but I don't know if I can live with the feeling that I am the one who made father feel unimportant." Anne immediately shook her head. She stepped closer and looked directly at William. "Charles's grief comes from the transition, not from me." She said that William didn't create the pain. The pain came from the fact that someone who had spent their life preparing for power now had to learn to share it. If William refused to lead because of guilt, Charles would also be unable to regain his lost power. Instead, the palace would continue to descend into chaos. Factions would emerge. Others would take advantage of the father and son's hesitation, and the very institution they were trying to protect would be weakened. Anne let the last words fall in silence. William didn't answer, but for the first time that day, his hand, which had been holding the keys, slowly loosened its grip. Anne gazed at William for a long time. In her eyes, there was no longer the sternness of someone who had just confronted Charles, but the calmness of someone who understood both father and son better than anyone else. After a few seconds of silence, she spoke softly. "Do you know why Charles chose you?" William didn't answer. He still looked down at the ceremonial key in his hand. Anne smiled faintly. She recalled a private conversation with Charles months earlier when all the decisions were still unspoken thoughts. At that time, Charles had described William with a very short sentence. "He can make others obey without making them feel defeated." Anne never forgot that statement, because she understood that was the real reason behind the transfer. Charles didn't relinquish power because he had completely lost faith in himself. He granted him the authority because he believed William could keep the royal machinery running smoothly without using power as a tool to impose his will on others. He believed his son was calm enough to maintain order, strong enough to protect the institution, tolerant enough not to humiliate those who disagreed with him, and most importantly, humble enough not to be consumed by power itself. Charles also hoped William would not have to live in the loneliness that many who had worn the crown had experienced. At that point, Anne bowed. She picked up the ceremonial key from the table. Then she gently placed it back in William's hand. She clasped his fingers around the key, as if handing over not just a symbol of power, but also the responsibility that the entire family had just placed upon his shoulders. Anne looked directly at William and said slowly, "Power only becomes dangerous when the holder begins to love it more than the duty it serves." William fell silent. He said no more. Neither did he sign any more orders. Instead, William stood up. He knew where he needed to go now was not the meeting room, but his father's office. The door to Charles's study creaked open. William entered. The king was still seated at his desk, but this time there was no longer the distance between a monarch and his heir. Only a father and son were trying to find a way forward together. William spoke first. He said that he did not want to run the royal family alone. He hoped Charles would continue to be by his side as his closest constitutional advisor. The experience Charles had accumulated over decades could not be replaced by a simple transfer. Charles looked up at his son. After a moment of silence, he nodded slightly. He accepted the offer. Father and son quickly agreed on a new principle. Charles would remain king. William would be responsible for the day-to-day operations of the royal household. Important national issues would still be discussed between father and son before decisions were made. No official would be allowed to use the new structure to divide them. And most importantly, the following morning, they would appear together in public, not to prove who was stronger, but to show the nation that this transition was not a power struggle. It was a continuation. That moment changed the meaning of everything. Charles was no longer a king slowly fading into the background, and William was no longer a waiting heir. From that night on, they became two generations sharing a common responsibility. One retained the crown, the other shouldered the weight of governing. And for the first time since the transition began, both understood that they would not have to move forward alone. The following morning, the whole of England awoke to an unusual atmosphere. Television stations abruptly interrupted their regular programming to focus on the latest developments from Buckingham Palace. Morning newspapers quickly published special editions, while hundreds of people gathered outside the palace gates, awaiting a moment that could go down in history. News of Prince William assuming an expanded executive role spread rapidly throughout the country, sparking countless speculations about the future of the monarchy. Shortly afterward, Buckingham Palace issued an official statement. According to the announcement, King Charles remained the monarch and continued to carry out his important constitutional responsibilities, while Prince William would be in charge of the day-to-day operations of the royal family. When the palace gates opened, Charles William and Princess Anne stepped out into the public. Charles gently placed his hand on his son's shoulder and gestured for William to go first. However, William did not walk alone. He turned back, waiting for his father to step forward beside him. Standing behind Anne nodded slightly. That small gesture served as confirmation that she fully supported the transition. It was no longer the image of a king left behind or a successor seizing power, but a continuation between two generations sharing responsibility. Hours later, the final family meeting took place, attended by Charles Camilla, William Catherine, and Anne. Charles affirmed that he would continue to fulfill his constitutional duties, advise on national affairs, and not interfere in day-to-day administrative decisions. William pledged never to use power for revenge, to always consult his father on major matters, and to prevent any factions from dividing the family. Camilla accepted working under the new structure, while Catherine was ready to stand alongside her husband in the responsibilities ahead. Anne also explained that she spoke out not to prevent William from taking power, but to prevent secrecy, resentment, and guilt from destroying the family. Finally, Charles gently pushed the briefcase toward William this time, withdrawing both hands completely. William took it, but immediately asked his father to remain by his side for the remainder of the journey. Charles maintained his position by trusting his son. William took on power without overshadowing his father, and Anne ensures that the transition took place in unity, not division. In your opinion, was Charles's decision to hand over the reins to William a wise move or a sign that an era had truly come to an end? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about the British royal family.